All right, let's dive right in. When I teach psychology, one of the first and honestly toughest questions we tackle is this. Where do we actually draw the line between what's normal and what's abnormal? It's a huge challenge, and it's right at the heart of the entire field. So let's explore it.
As you can probably guess, this boundary isn't some nice, clean line. It's way more complex, more like a blurry transition. It's a gray area. And to really get a feel for this dilemma, let's start with a story that highlights it perfectly.
Okay, so picture two boys. We've got 4-year-old Michael and 10-year-old Jake. Both of them are super active. Michael can't make it through a movie without fidgeting, and Jake gets up from the dinner table like 15 times every meal. Now, on the surface, the behaviors seem pretty similar, right? But a clinical look would lead to two totally different conclusions. For Michael, his behavior is totally normal for a 4-year-old. For Jake, though, his actions are getting in the way of school and his friendships, which points toward a possible diagnosis like ADHD. This right here is the core challenge.
So how in the world do we systematically tell these two situations apart? To do that, psychologists use a really foundational tool that helps us map out the entire landscape of human behavior. And that tool is the normal curve, which you've probably heard called the bell curve. Think of it like this. The flat line at the bottom represents some psychological trait, like activity level or conscientiousness. The height of the curve simply shows how many people in the population have that particular amount of the trait. So, as you can see, most of us, the vast majority, are clustered right there in the big hump in the middle. That's what we statistically define as the normal range. It's only when you start moving out toward the very ends, the tails of this curve, that behaviors become statistically rare or what we might call abnormal. And this shows us a fundamental principle, and this is so important. Abnormality is usually a matter of degree, not of kind. What that means is the behaviors we call abnormal aren't some alien thing. They're typically just extreme versions of traits that are completely normal in smaller doses. The difference is about how much, not what.
Take conscientiousness, for instance. If you have way too little of it, you might have a really hard time holding down a job. But on the flip side, what if you have way too much? Well, that can lead to something like obsessive-compulsive disorder, or OCD, where that need for control actually starts to cause major problems. It's the exact same trait, just expressed at the absolute extremes of the spectrum. So, the big question is, when does a behavior that's way out on the end of the curve stop being just a quirk and start becoming a clinical disorder? To answer that, psychologists have come up with a set of criteria to make that call a little more objective. To get beyond just a subjective guess, clinicians look for 4 key indicators. 1. Is it statistically rare? 2. Does it cause the person personal distress or suffering? 3. Is it socially inappropriate, meaning does it violate the norms of their culture? And 4, does it cause impairment or dysfunction in their life? Now, all of these are important, but one of them carries way more weight than the others. And that is impairment. This one is the real game changer. A behavior is most likely to be called a disorder when it seriously gets in the way of a person's ability to function in their day-to-day life, at school, at their job, or in their relationships. This single factor is what really separated Jake's situation from Michael's. Jake's hyperactivity was causing dysfunction, Michael's was not. This more nuanced way of looking at things has led to a really significant evolution in diagnostics, and it's pushing the whole field toward a more sophisticated and, frankly, more accurate model of mental health. The field is really shifting away from that traditional categorical way of thinking, where you either have a disorder or you don't, like a light switch. We're moving towards a dimensional model, which is much more like a dimmer switch. This new approach, seen in systems like HiTOP, understands that psychological symptoms exist on a continuum. We all have these traits, it's just a question of degree. So why does this shift matter so much? Well, beyond just being more scientifically accurate, it's profoundly more humane. It helps chip away at stigma by highlighting that people with a diagnosis have far more in common with everyone else than they have differences.
And finally, we have to add one last crucial layer of complexity to all of this. The definitions of what's normal and abnormal aren't universal truths. They are profoundly shaped by our culture and our specific moment in history.
Let's consider the act of communicating with spirits. In a Linh Dom ceremony in Vietnam, this is a completely normal and even revered spiritual practice. But if that exact same experience happened outside of that specific cultural setting and was causing someone to not be able to function, it would probably be looked at in a clinical setting as a possible symptom of psychosis. Context is absolutely everything.
And history gives us a very stark example. Up until 1973, homosexuality was officially classified as a mental disorder in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. This was a profound historical error. And it serves as a crucial reminder that our diagnostic labels are human-made. They evolve, which demands a lot of humility and critical thinking from all of us.
So, when it all comes down to it, the boundary we're trying to find between normal and abnormal isn't a rigid wall. It's a permeable, gradual transition zone along the huge, continuous spectrum of human experience.
This whole perspective really reframes the discipline. Abnormal psychology is not the study of abnormal people. It's the science of profound human struggles. That completely shifts the focus from an us versus them mentality to a shared understanding that, hey, we all exist somewhere on this very same spectrum.
And that leaves us with a final thought to mull over. Maybe the most important shift we can make isn't in our definitions, but in our questions. Instead of asking, what's wrong with someone, maybe we should be asking, how can we better understand and support their human struggle? That, to me, is the truly essential work of psychology.